Next, I'm going to show you how to take a piece of beadwork off the loom. I've woven my piece here. Maybe I'll make a little earring out of it. And I have my working thread on the needle. To finish this, you're going to weave back and forth just across a couple rows, pushing up from underneath, just like you did when you were weaving. So I'm going to go through one row. I'm just going to go through 2 rows. Now, you want to come through halfway through a row before you snip it off. Can you see how the needle's coming up through halfway? And this is because the thread, you don't want the thread end to show on the outside. And you want to be careful here. You're going to pull your working thread and take a nipper. And that's done. Now your working thread is woven in, but you still have to take the piece off the loom. You want to leave yourself as much of the warp thread as possible because these are the ends. One of the finishing ways, you're going to thread these onto a needle and weave them back into a piece, or add fringes or loops to them. So you want to give yourself as long as possible the extra warp. So that's why I'm going to cut my work off right at the nail head on the loom. Let's snip this off here. There you go. So you have your piece cut off the loom and you've left as long as possible of the warp threads to work with. Start from the middle warp thread out. You're going to thread each thread individually on a needle. Don't sit down if you have to, it's really not a big deal. I'm going to give you a needle threading tip and you're going to work the warp threads back into your piece. Now keep in mind this is just one way to finish. So, and it seems to be the most typical way, if you're going to have a free form piece like an earring or a cuff. Here's a needle threading tip. Take the wildfire and flatten it between your thumb and forefinger and bring that thread down until it looks like a poppy seed. Now you're going to take the eye of your needle and you're going to bring it down to that thread. And there it is. Now these warp threads aren't really long, and there's a chance that you may want to start working with a shorter needle. I have a 2-inch needle here. You can work with a little shorter needle. What you're going to do is you're going to go back through each bead in a zigzag pattern, weaving it down just through a couple rows. So you can see where I'm starting here, and I'm going to go down through just one bead, the next bead, and pull it tight. And then I'm going to go back in the opposite direction. And I'm going to turn this to be oriented, and please don't be afraid to turn your work every which way to make it easy on yourself, depending on how you like to stitch. Now you can see I'm pulling that warp thread in this way. Now I'm turning my piece again so that I can work in a direction that's comfortable for me, and I'm going through just one bead in the next row, and really that's all you need. There's no knotting needed or anything. I'm going to bring my nipper tool down. I'm going to pull that really snug. One done. And you're going to do this to the rest of your threads if you want to keep this piece contained. Here's some examples over here of pieces that were finished using this technique. The wrap bracelet, every warp thread was woven back in, and then a little magnetic clasp was added onto a wire guardian. That was sewn in using the wildfire, same method, back and forth as you would end a warp thread. On my film strip cuff, I kept 2 of the warp threads and used them to make a little toggle stem for the toggle. So there's a variation. The earrings, which are about the size of the piece that I just showed you how to demo, I used some of the warp threads to make decorative embellishment loops and also a loop for the ear wire. You can add fringes, you can add more beads with different charms hanging down, and these are different ways that incorporate the method of working the warp thread back into the piece. Now let me show you one of my favorite ways to finish is to tuck the warp threads out of sight into something else. A lot of people will use bead embroidery backings and they'll tuck the warp threads, cut them short, fold them underneath, like for instance they would do this, and they would adhere it to a piece of ultra suede or similar kind of embroidery fabric and use an overcast stitch to just attach it to a backing. Then you don't have to worry about sewing the warp threads in. But over here, I have bezel rings and bezel cuffs, and I used Beadalon's FX squares, which I cut to fit into the bezels, and they're an adhesive on two sides, so I stuck the adhesive into the bezel and peeled off the backing and then put my beadwork in, tucking the threads in, so I didn't have to worry about weaving in those pesky thread ends. And they're just a few of the ways to finish off your loom bead weaving piece.